I want to talk about the nature of objects. We've talked some about personal identity, what it is to be me, but I want to talk about the nature of objects, what it is to be this mask, for example, or this pair of glasses, or this key, and so forth. So we're going to be discussing questions about the identity of objects in general. Now, you might expect that Hume's view of objects in general is going to tie in with his view of the identity of people. After all, we're a kind of object, you might think. And so it won't be a surprise. It does, okay? Now, in a lot of philosophers, there would be quite a difference. In Locke, for example, the continuity of a physical object is different from the continuity of a mere lump of matter. That's different from the continuity of a machine or an animal, and that's different from what it is to be the same person. But in Hume, as we'll see, it doesn't really matter whether we're talking about selves, people, or whether we're talking about ships or keys or anything else. Really, he gives a unified theory of identity. Or you might say of, well, the opposite of identity, of diversity of all these objects. There really is no identity to these objects, except something we impose. But there is no underlying unity to the thing. It's not really one thing. We act as if it's one thing. We call it one thing because it's convenient for us. So let's take a look at Hume's view of the nature of objects. It's the same as the view of the self, really. It's a bundle theory. He attacks the idea of substance, and we'll talk about that attack mounted by Hume and Bishop Berkeley later. Hume thinks that all objects are bundles of qualities, and we do the bundling. Or at least it gets done in some way by human nature. It's not always conscious, though sometimes it's conscious, the way we put together objects and form them into unities, or at least we treat them as unities, but they aren't really. Just as the self is something more like a theater in which a lot of things are taking place, or a commonwealth that really has a kind of artificial unity to it, there is no one thing there. So similarly, it's the case for us, and it's the case for every other object. Let's go back to a pre-Socratic philosopher. Heraclitus famously said you can't step in the same river twice. What he meant is, by the time you've put your foot back into the river, well, your foot has changed, the river has changed, and so really nothing can be repeated. Everything is changing constantly. The only constant, Heraclitus says, is change. I think Hume has a similar perspective. So let's take a look at an object like this river, the Cayster. The Cayster is a river in the middle of what is now Turkey. In the ancient world, it was called Lydia. And it has a kind of unity, but imagine going to the Cayster and putting your toe in, and then putting it in again. Well, is it the same river? It's different water, notice, that's flowing by. And you might say, yes, but it's water in the same banks. Well, not exactly, right? I mean, riverbeds change as the water flows through them. Some of the dirt gets washed away. The banks slightly change. I mean, it's very small. You're not going to see it in a big way unless there's a major flood going on or some huge storm that changes the path of the river. But it is changing very slowly, and over time, you can see that rivers' paths change. Oxbow lakes form. You can find things being, worn away like the Grand Canyon. And so in short, it's not really remaining constant, even the river path or bed, let alone the water that's going by it. Well, let's take a look at this river, somewhat closer to where I am. This is the Colorado River in Austin. If we think about that river and think about dipping our toes into it twice, we can say, yes, the water is different now. The path, even the riverbed and so on, that's slightly different. As you can see, a lot of things have been constructed on the bank, so it won't always be the activity of the water that's changing this. It may be other kinds of activity. Maybe dipping my toe in actually moves a bit of dirt into the river or out of it. And so all of those things can change the path of the river. Quine talks about this kind of example, and he says, look, you can't step into the same river stage twice. Imagine a river being put together from all these temporal stages. Here is the Cayster at this moment, the Cayster at this moment, the Cayster at this moment, or the Colorado at this moment, and so on. Call those river stages, temporal stages of the river. You can't step into the same river stage twice because it's gone. It was there for only a moment. But you can surely step into the same river twice. You can say, hey, I went boating in the Colorado a while ago, and then I went again later. And you're in the same river twice. twice. That makes sense. But how is that possible? Well, Quine isn't just saying that Heraclitus is wrong. He's saying, really, technically, what we call a river is just a combination of these river stages. We apply a term like Cayster or Colorado to a variety of these river stages, but we call it the same river. Why? Because the stages are similar. So in a certain sense, really all we have are the river stages, the snapshots of a river that go by. Think of a film strip where you've got the film of the river, and there, image by image. It's just that they go by very, very rapidly so that we don't distinguish. We group them together and call that one river because those stages are so similar to one another. But there is no real underlying unity, you might say. There is different water at every single stage. And so I go and I look and say, there's the Colorado again. Well, the water I'm looking at is completely different from the last time I was there looking at it. Still, we group them together because they're rather similar impressions. We have similar experiences, so we call it the same river because the river stages have a lot of similarity to one another. It's the same with all objects. And so experience presents us with these impressions. The impressions are momentary. They're of river stages, or person stages, or glasses stages, or water stages, or whatever it is. And they are, in many cases, similar enough that we group them together and call them one object. So I look over at the door, I look over again, I say, I'm seeing the same door. I've got two visual impressions of a door. They're similar enough that I call that the same door and act as if the object is continuing. But really, I'm just grouping together a series of similar impressions at different times. So here is how Hume puts it. The objects which are variable or interrupted and yet are supposed to continue the same are such only as to constitute a succession of parts. They're connected together by resemblance, contiguity, or causation. All objects to which we ascribe identity without observing their invariableness and uninterruptedness are such as consist of a succession of related objects. We have a variety of different impressions of the door or of the river. We group them together and call them impressions of one object. And so similarly, the river itself, the door itself, are a series of river stages or door stages. We group those together and call those one river or one door. But actually, what we're doing is bundling together a bunch of impressions into an impression of an object or an idea of an object. We're taking those various stages of an object and treating them as if they are a continuing object. We're doing it not completely arbitrarily. It's not as if I pick up the paper and I say, look, it's the same door. There's no continuity there. They're not very similar impressions at all. So there's a pattern to how I do this. The mind has certain customs and habits for doing it. It's not arbitrary, but it's also not rationally justified. There is no actual unity there. I'm doing the grouping. And so there is a succession of related objects, related stages that are being lumped together and treated as one object. But all of that unification is happening in my mind. It's not there in the world. So think about an object like the Ship of Theseus. This is a famous example in philosophy. It began to be discussed among the ancient philosophers, certainly by the time of Aristotle. Plutarch writes about it. And so let's take a look at this case. It's an especially interesting case, but Quine or Hume would say, or Heraclitus for that matter, would say, look, this is the case with all objects, not just ships like the Ship of Theseus.
The ship wherein Theseus and the youth of Athens returned from Crete had 30 oars, and was preserved by the Athenians. They took away the old planks as they decayed, putting in new and stronger timber in their places, insomuch that this ship became a standing example among the philosophers, for the logical question of things that grow, one side holding that the ship remained the same, and the other contending that it was not the same. Plutarch. What does the ship of Theseus consist of? If it consists of each plank which makes it up, then once every plank has been replaced, you have a different ship. In that case, you have to wonder at what point the Ship of Theseus stops being the Ship of Theseus.
So here is a way of thinking about this problem. We've got the ship, and as we're sailing along in quest of defeating the Minotaur and doing other things that Theseus did, Well, parts of the ship start decaying. Maybe there's a storm and some things break, some timbers break. Maybe some of them just start rotting and we have to replace them. Maybe some of them are starting to age and we realize, look, we better repair this part of the ship before it starts leaking. Whatever happens, we go along and we repair the ship as it goes. We take out some old planks, we replace some new planks. And we keep doing that. Sometimes we may have to pull aside and go to land to do that. Often we do it as we're sailing around. In any case, we repair the ship as it goes. Now, you might imagine over time that all of the original lumber gets replaced in this way. It might be replaced, a lot of it at once, but it might be replaced plank by plank so that it takes quite a bit of time. Something similar might happen in a fence. Various pieces of wood that make up the fence deteriorate over time. You replace this one, you replace that one. That post rots out, so you have to replace that post. And you do this periodically. Well, by the end, is it the same fence? And similarly here, is it the same ship? Now, there's a way of taking this and making it even more acute. Because we're tempted to say, look, as long as it's happening slowly enough and these stages are similar enough to one another, yeah, of course it's the same ship. I don't even see why it's a problem. To see it more clearly, I think we can take a case where there are actually two ships. Here, in fact, we have, as part of this little fireplace display, two ships of Theseus. And so let's take a look at an alteration of this that appears in Thomas Hobbes. The idea is going to be that somebody is gathering up those old planks and rebuilding the ship. The idea then is they do this very systematically over a period of years. And so we end up with two ships. We've got the Ship of Theseus, the one that's been repaired gradually and is still sailing around. But we also have this other one. The person has been gathering up all the wood of the Ship of Theseus, the original ship, and has finally gotten the original plans and has rebuilt the entire ship. Original planks of wood in the original plan. And let's say he displays it in a museum and says, the original Ship of Theseus. Well, which one is truly the Ship of Theseus? One of them, and don't be misled here by the fact that it says the Ship of Theseus, and you might say, well, it's Theseus' ship, it's the one Theseus owns. So let's imagine that instead of the Ship of Theseus, we give it a name, call it the Argo. So then, which one is the Argo? Is it the one that Theseus is still sailing around? He says, look, I've had this ship all the way along, and we are tempted to say, yeah, you've had that ship, right? It's gone all the way along. But then the one in the museum, if an object is, as Aristotle thinks, matter plus form, it's the original matter, and it's the original form. How can you deny that it's the original object? So which one is truly the Argo? Well, you might say only a philosopher would worry about that, but not necessarily. Suppose Theseus finds out that the original Argo is being displayed in this guy's museum. And he says, what is this? I'm sailing around the Argo. You don't have the rights to use that. You can't advertise that as the Ship of Theseus, the original Argo. And he sues him. So you're the judge. And you have to say, okay, shoot, I have to decide which is the original Argo. Is it the ship that is sailing around still by Theseus? Or is it the ship in that museum? It is the original wood, and it's built according to the original plan. So is it the Argo? Who has the rights to call it the original Argo? Anyway, it's not a trivial problem.
For example, that Ship of Theseus, concerning the difference were made by continual reparation in taking out the old planks and putting in new, were, after all the planks were changed, the same numerical ship it was at the beginning. And if some man had kept the old planks as they were taken out, and by putting them afterwards together in the same order, had again made a ship of them, this, without doubt, had also been the same numerical ship with that which was at the beginning, and so there would have been two ships numerically the same, which is absurd. Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes is making the puzzle more clear by suggesting that the planks which have been taken out and replaced from the original ship could be used to construct a ship of the same design, and in that case you have two identical ships, one which is made of the original planks, constructed in the same way, and the other which is the original ship with each plank replaced.
So let's think about the general form of this problem. And I'm going to do it with something that is an example much closer to my own experiences, the Camaro of Daniel. I have not had a ship. I have not sailed it around in the Aegean and replaced planks. But this is my first car, a 1975 red Chevrolet Camaro. And I kept that car for many, many years. It gradually deteriorated and parts had to be replaced. So there were many things. Of course, tires had to be replaced. A variety of engine parts had to be replaced. This type of thing that's standard maintenance on a car. But in this case, there were a lot of other problems as well. For a while, as a graduate student, I had an apartment over a chemical factory in the Ohio River. Nice view, however, terrible pollution coming out of the chemical factory. It ate away much of the paint and caused severe rust problems in the poor Camaro, even when it was quite young. By the time it got older, it was held together with aluminum foil and roofing tar, believe it or not. And so it was a mess. Anyway, finally, I got to the stage where I realized I can't drive this car anymore. It had become very dangerous. 3 times in 1 month it had broken down and nobody quite knew how to fix it. Everything was wrong with it. And so I sat there with it the last time, waiting for the tow truck to come and take it to the junkyard. And somebody came by and said, "You're getting rid of that car? Why?" And I said, "Well, look, it's got problems. The engine is a mess and nobody can fix it." And he said, "Well, you could get a new engine." Okay, the electrical system is a mess. When you turn on the turn signals, the brake lights come on and so on. Press on the brake and the fasten it, seatbelt light comes on. And the guy said, "Well, you could get a new electrical system." Well, but look, I mean, the body is terrible. I mean, look at the rust. It's held together with aluminum foil. Well, you could get a new body. But look, the frame is all rusted out. It's in terrible. Well, you could get a new frame. In short, he was talking about replacing every part of the car. Now, I said, "Well, you're really telling me it's just replace everything. In effect, you're telling me just rebuild a new 1975 Camaro. That's ridiculous." And so, suppose I had done that, would it count as the same car? Intuitively, it feels like, look, if that happened over many, many years, over the whole of the 17 years I owned the car, then you might say, yeah, same car. But if it happens all at once, you're just rebuilding a new car. You're not really building the same car and fixing the same car. It's surely not the same after all of that. Hobbes is pointing out an even greater aspect of the problem. Because Hobbes is telling us, look, if we have this scenario where Theseus has been replacing the planks of the Argo, bit by bit, someone else has been gathering them up, we've got a situation where we had one ship here. Let's call that the original Argo. No problem about that. But then, as time goes on, the planks get replaced. So we get various stages of the Argo here. And now, my goodness, those, well, it's changing a little bit in the way I draw it. But these are boat stages, you might say. But then somebody else starts gathering up the planks. And so they gather planks from this, and eventually they produce a boat that is just like this one. Now, this has actually the original matter, the original wood from the ship. It has the original form. It is built in exactly the same structure. This one, well, Theseus, you might imagine, or at least his descendants or somebody, is still sailing this around. It has a kind of continuity here, but it has been repaired. And so this is now entirely different matter, different wood. And presumably it's not entirely a different form, but it's probably a somewhat different form. He's made repairs and made improvements as he's gone. And yes, that mast broke, so we had to have a new one, and the wood isn't exactly the same height. And they replaced the sails, and these sails are even better, and so forth. So it's going to be, well, related, but not exactly the same structure. We'll say it's a similar structure. But of course, we can imagine changes that make it look quite radically different if we've done that gradually. And so now the question is, well, at this stage, what do we say about this? Are there two Argos? So I ask you now, is this the Argo? Is this the Argo? Here's the strange thing. If the guy had not been gathering all of these up, if he had not rebuilt the ship, we'd be saying, Of course that's the Argo, right? This is the way it goes with objects. We've got all these Argo stages. We put them together and call that the same ship, the Argo. But now that somebody's done this, we suddenly say, but that is the original wood in the original configuration. What's wrong with that picture? Well, it hasn't been done gradually. And so you might think, that's the thing. There's a continuity here. So perhaps, if you're Locke, you're going to think continuity is the big matter. So you're going to think continuity, that's what this has. This doesn't have continuity. Now, if he had the original plan and was gathering up the wood gradually and was putting it in this frame gradually, and so gradually this replica grew, would we then say, oh, well, now it does have continuity, so it's okay? I'm not sure. We've got a number of choices here. One choice is to say, this is the Argo. Guy loses the suit. He has to stop using that name for the boat in the museum because, after all, really, this is the Argo, that's not. We could say, as Aristotle's theory might tempt him to say, actually, this is the Argo. This is the one that is the original matter and the original form. This has become a different ship. We could be somebody who says, well, I don't think in this scenario either one is really the Argo. This is Heraclitus' view. Actually, you can't sail in the same boat twice, let alone step into the same river twice. It's going to be different at every stage. So this isn't strictly speaking the Argo, and neither is this one. And then you could say, actually, there are two Argos now. There's Argo 1 and Argo 2. Of course, they're not exactly the same ship. We don't want to identify them. But now there are two Argos. So, in short, there are four possible attitudes we might have about this. This one is the Argo. That one's the Argo. Both are the Argo. Neither one is the Argo. And all of those are viable. Hume's view is actually none of those four possibilities. It's still another possibility. It's to say, look, there is no fact of the matter about this question. So it doesn't make any sense to say which one is really the Argo. There is no really the Argo. It's a question of what we want to say. So Hume, remember about the self, had said all the nice and settled questions concerning personal identity can never possibly be decided and are to be regarded rather as grammatical than as philosophical difficulties. But it's true about all objects, including the ship, about the Camaro, everything. All the disputes concerning the identity of connected objects are merely verbal. It's a question of how we're going to use words. So Hume says there simply is no fair standard for deciding a case like this between Theseus, who is saying, I'm sailing the Argo, and the museum owner who says, I've got the Argo, original wood in the original structure. Hume just says, as the relations and the ease of the transition may diminish by insensible degrees, we have no just standard by which we can decide any dispute concerning the time when they acquire or lose a title to the name of identity. So in short, there simply is no fact of the matter about whether this one's the Argo or that one is, or both are, or neither are. We just have to decide. So if you're the judge and you hire Hume as your expert witness, Hume is going to say, look, there is no way of getting this case right or wrong. There simply is no fact of the matter about which one is the Argo. We just have to make up our minds about which one is the Argo. Hume says, I think most people are going to say in this situation, the ship that Theseus is still sailing around is the Argo. They're going to use Locke's criterion of continuity as their way of grouping things together. But that's a decision they're making. It's not that there is a metaphysical fact. This one really is the Argo. Instead, they're just saying, well, yeah, gosh, it's most useful for us to be able to treat these objects that are pretty similar, even if parts are being replaced and repairs are being made and improvements are being made and so forth. We want to say that's the same thing. It's pretty useful to us. I want to be able to say, yeah, I live in the same house, even if I've added on a room and even if I've replaced the floors and so on. And so, yeah, it's easier for us if we say it's the ship still sailing around. Sorry, museum owner, you lose. But that's our decision because it's useful for us to use language that way. It's not because there's a real fact of the matter about what ship really is the Argo.